I'm gonna keep running. I think I have some value to add, but I'm actually running my mouth so much. I'm here about getting nauseous, so I can imagine someone might get nauseous listening to this. But what I wanted to say is that the reason I was referring to faith like that is because I was saying that I don't want to say that any particular faith or tradition or dogma or doctrine is better or worse than another one. That's the last thing I would want to say, and because of that, I don't want to commend one over the other. I reference Arthur Avalon a lot because it's informed me, but I only reference so much of what he said as though it pertains to the general human experience, and that there are lessons and insights that are somewhat universal and applicable. So I'm not referencing even Arthur Avalon in terms of like faith, or like I'm not mentioning names of awesome, outstanding names, except for like a specific term. Like I had mentioned Divani, and I think that's an actual awesome name, but it's I only referenced that in another video in another series because it refers to a form of consciousness that is within a human being that may be beyond a human being, and is responsible for speech, and that's recognized as Divani in the faith in the traditions of India. I made another video saying that a lot of people wouldn't. You can appreciate that there are different tiers of consciousness even within a human being that can be appreciated in pop culture in terms. Sometimes pop culture has lessons in wisdom in it. For example, think on your feet, weak in the knees. You're not shaking if you're not shaking like Elvis, like using your hips. Some people might have been thinking with this or that member that got them in this and that much trouble, or this one had enough of a pair to undergo something or to sustain something or to do something. That one is that that one that person has a lot of think with your gut, like what's the first thing, what's your gut reaction, or that person has a lot of guts. That's another example. The bile of that person, what kind of bile would that person have to say something like that? That has to do with like what's called the humors in other times, like some of the different fluids in the body that inform conduct in demeanor, or think with your heart, feel with your heart. Some people would say that heart refers to mind, will, and emotions, but in some of the traditions of India, even the traditions that publicized their idea of there being different tiers of consciousness, um, uh, and even the same tradition that would refer to Divani, like I referenced, would appreciate the heart as the center of consciousness, according to Arthur Avalon. Then sometimes you feel something in your throat, like you got something to say in your throat, or you're afraid. You can feel that in your throat. According to Arthur Avalon, there are different tiers of speech, from causal, subtle to gross speech, and so we always have speech going on, like in our tongue. And sometimes your tongue might actually be moving as you're thinking. You might so you're when you're actually speaking, your tongue is moving according to as you're thinking. As soon as you're thinking something, your tongue is moving when you're speaking. That's when you're speaking out loud. But it might equally exist when you're quiet, or even when you're meditating. Is that on a level your tongue is already moving like that, and that it gets ramped up, when the current gets strong enough, it gets enunciated, and it comes out. And that may work for or against us, but it had actually already been moving. That might be said, and that's subtle, causal, and gross speech, according to Arthur Avalon. But that's similar to what's being called Divani, as that it's a propensity of consciousness that's responsible for speech and communication that's broader than you could generally speak. Think about how difficult it is to think about something, right? So if I were to ask you, where in your room right now is your what position are your blankets in your room right now? Are they you Unless you just made your bed, you couldn't recall how your blankets are in your room right now. Yet you can recall the exact word you need to say a specific thing in a specific moment, as you have not heard that word in the last 5 or 10 months, or used that word in the last 5 or 10 months, maybe even several years since you've used a particular word. Yet that word is on the tip of your tongue as you need it. Is that not a higher form of consciousness than your ordinary memory, generally speaking, your ordinary conscious mind, generally speaking? So that's an example of like what's called Divani, like that. But then also you have sometimes you might be too analytical or too cerebral, or something might make the blood hot, the blood turn. All that is different levels of consciousness within a human being, and that's actually a little bit broader and more sophisticated than what could be appreciated in terms arbitrary terms in terms of chakra. I think that the word, according to Arthur Avalon, maybe an older word that is referred to with chakra is Padma. I think it's called Padma. But it doesn't. Nothing has to be limited, and it doesn't have to be limited to the centers of consciousness as we're shown. But yeah, I'm not arguing with that, and I don't have a background to make those type of statements. But I'm just appreciating that there's different degrees of consciousness, such as our blood, even our knees when we're falling in love, our feet when we're being challenged, or we have different grades of consciousness. But the only reason that I reference things like that, and even that name, would be for the sake of the concept, not for being religious for the sake of it. So I wanted to say that I don't offer religious content on this channel unless it's referring to a concept or to something teachable that's universal. And that's universal. It has different applications and value by being universal. But part of that is that I wanted to say that. So, but if you imagine like on a Sunday, like in the West where I'm at, is that you have a lot of people going to church right now. Like as I'm speaking, there's a lot of people at church and there's a lot of people praying, and we can't get away from like the connection between people. An example of that is like sometimes you think about how beautiful a sunset is, and I wanted this is a little bit about what I'm talking about, but I think that when I moved to the Southwest as a child, my mom told me that my mom and my father connected with the neighborhood and the environment in the community differently by having a child, because therefore I was playing with other children, and they were meeting those children's parents, or they were meeting those children, or they were having different experiences with professionals, like say maintenance people or people in the community that would be different by them having a child. They're having different reasons, or even managers, they're having different reasons to talk to people and interact with people by having a child differently. So what I want to say is that sometimes I think that children connect us to an environment where, to a land. People connect us to a land. When you drive through a neighborhood and you have a certain feeling in your heart about that neighborhood, maybe nostalgia or maybe fear, part of your connection to that land had been the people that you met on that land, especially children, but not only children, is that people tie us to a land, is what I wanted to say. But then broadly is that sometimes if you appreciate a sunset, like if I go through, sometimes when I was taking care of, when I was operating as a school bus driver, I would see some very beautiful sunsets. And they were a little bit more beautiful when they were in the areas that I was serving and I was having a connection with the community there. The sunset would be very beautiful, and it would be a very beautiful thing, like to complete a day. You complete a day where you just served this many people in the community. You've helped them have a good. You've just helped over 150 beautiful people have a productive day. That's very meaningful. And then you see a sunset like that is very meaningful. But I want to say is that sunset is very deep because our breath, as we're breathing, there's actually not a line between a beautiful sunset that you see over a city and all the people breathing in that city. There's something connected in the air, and that's really deep and beautiful. If you think about the scholar Taj Tariq Bey had said that. Now I said in a video that in the simplest terms, spirituality is being graceful. That to me, that's the simplest terms of spirituality. Is just grace, gracefulness. Favor would be like a strong an enjoyable outcome of that, but more significant is just grace is very spiritual. But according to Taj Tariq Bey, breath is what is spiritual. So when you're referring to breath, you're referring to spirit, and a lot of yoga, like I've referenced a lot, is fundamentally about breath. Therefore, it's fundamentally spiritual. So a sunset is very spiritual because it's the air. It's that many people breathing. Our breathing would have to affect the sunset in the air, the atmosphere in a deep way. We sometimes don't think about how our very breathing is a part of and is the atmosphere, but so would our life and our feelings and our thoughts. Because actually, as you're thinking something, according to Arthur Avalon, you're breathing differently as you're thinking differently. So you actually can't separate your weight. What you're doing requires breathing. Like different things, whether lifting weights, making love, reading a book, it requires a specific grade of breathing. And therefore, our thoughts might actually affect the air that we breathe back out.